Welcome back, dear students. So we were at advantages of sampling. So these are the few advantages of the sampling, that whenever you are doing sampling, it gives you accuracy and quality control. Then it gives you the economic, and it should be economic, because you cannot study the whole population. You are taking some part of it. So when you are taking few or some part of it, it's more economic. So cost wise, it is more economic than economy in terms of time. Also, you cannot study the whole population, because if you want to study the whole population, it is very much time consuming. So as compared to that, it is time saving when you are taking sample, and economy in terms of labor and effort too. Now, how it is a low cost of sampling, that if the data were to be collected from the entire population, as I said, the cost will be quite high. A sample is very small proportion of the same population, right? So the cost will be lower if the data is collected for a sample of population, which is a very big advantage, right? Then it is less time consuming in the sampling. Why? Because use of sampling takes less time also, because as I said, that if you are going to do the same thing for the whole population, it will take definitely more time. It consumes less time than the census technique. In a sense, it's tabulation, analysis, etc. Because if you want to do it for some small group and for the whole population, if you want to prepare the analysis or make the tables, then it will take much less time for the sample as compared to the population. Then the scope or the accuracy and quality control of this particular sampling is always high, because you are drawing a sample and computed the desired descriptive statistics for that particular sample only. So it is possible to determine the stability of the obtained sample value, right? So you can find the proper value of that sample, right? A sample, this kind of sample will represent the population from which it is drawn, right? So you don't need to study the whole population. It will also permit a high degree of accuracy due to a limited area of operation or limited group of operation, right? So moreover, careful execution of the field work is possible, because if you are taking the whole field, it will be very difficult. If you are taking some part of the field, it is more easy. Ultimately, uh, the results of the sampling study will turn out to be sufficiently accurate, because you are going to you don't need to study the whole population. You can take the small part of it, because that is representing the population, and definitely whatever you are going to get is the correct or accurate results. Now, third one is scope of the sampling is high. Now, it is not written it here, but I'm just giving you some more advantage. I'm just telling you some more advantages. That is, scope of the sampling is high, because the investigator is concerned with the generalization of the data. Now, to study a whole population in order to arrive at a generalizations would be impractical, right? So some populations are so large, like I want to study the soil, the overall soil population, then the population of microorganisms in the soil. It's too large. I cannot take all soil. I just cannot take, right? So some populations are so large that their characteristics could not be measured, right? So before the measurement has to be completed, the population would have changed. So some of the process of sampling makes it possible to arrive at a generalization by studying the variables within a relatively small population, small portion of that particular population. Means I want to study rhizosphere soil. Rhizosphere soil is the soil which is immediately or attached near the road. So I have to just uproot one plant and take that soil. So instead of studying the whole soil, I can just take that sample and I will be able to know, because in that particular area, microbes are more active, right? As compared to the microbes which are present in the bare soil or the soil which is not near the plant, right? So I will be able to know more interaction there for the microorganisms. So if I take that kind of soil, I could be able to know more about the microbes and their interactions. Then the organization of convenience, because the sampling gives this convenience. Organizational problems which are involved in the sampling are very few actually. Since sample is of a small size, vast facilities are not required, right? You don't need, if whenever the sample size is more, or you are taking the whole population, then all these points become more complicated. Then sampling is therefore economical, obviously, in respect to the resources. Study of samples involves less space and equipment. It is the intensive and exhaustive data. It gives the intensive and exhaustive data. So in sample studies, measurements or observations are made of a limited number. So in intensive and exhaustive data are collected. So whatever data, the correct data you need, that can be collected just by collecting the sample. The sampling is suitable in limited resources. You cannot do it, you can do it in a limited resources, because the resources available within an organization may be limited. So studying the entire universe is not viable. So the population can be satisfactorily covered through the sampling. Now, where limited resources exist, use of sampling is an appropriate strategy. While conducting marketing research, this type of limited resources, that question comes there. Then the sampling gives better rapport. So how an effective research study requires a good rapport between the researcher and the respondents, right? So if you are going to do the research between the animals or between the people, then you need the respondents also, right? And those respondents, the researcher and respondent must have a good rapport, right? So when the population of the study is large, you cannot make the rapport with each and every person. But if the sample, which is small group of that population, you can manage the samples, right? Very well, right? And the researcher, to establish adequate rapport with the respondent, you can make the adequate rapport with the respondent. Now, with like advantages of sampling are there are disadvantages of sampling also. So what are them? The reliability of sample depends upon the appropriateness of the sampling method used, right? So which method you are using is very important. The purpose of sampling theory is to make sampling more efficient. But the real difficulty lie in the selection, estimation, and administration of the sample. So there are a few disadvantages, which are chances of bias, then difficulties in selecting truly a representative sample, then need for subject-specific knowledge, then changeability of the sample units, and then impossibility of sampling. So what is the meaning of chances of bias? The serious limitation of the sampling method is that it involves biased selection and thereby leads us to draw erroneous conclusions, right? So your conclusions may be wrong because the sample is biased. Bias arises when the method of selection of sample employed is faulty, right? And relative small samples properly selected may be much more reliable than large samples poorly selected. Then the second is difficulty in selecting a truly representative sample. Then in that, the difficulties in selecting a truly representative sample produces reliable and accurate results only when they are representative of the whole group. So selection of a truly representative sample is difficult when the phenomena under study are of complex nature. So what kind of study you are doing is very important. So selecting good sample is difficult in these kinds of scenario. Inadequate knowledge in the subject, right? That is the problem or disadvantage of the sampling. So use of sampling method requires adequate subject specific knowledge in sampling techniques. So your sampling techniques must be correct. If they are wrong, then obviously you're going to face the problem. So sampling involves statistical analysis and calculation of probable error. Everywhere we are going to see what errors we have to consider when you are doing the sampling. Then when the researcher lacks specialized knowledge in sampling, he or she may commit serious mistakes. So consequently, the result of the study will be misleading. You will not be going to get the correct result. Then changeability of units, what it means that when the unit of populations are not in homogeneous, the sampling technique will be unscientific. So homogeneous, if the unit is heterogeneous, then you have to take a special care. In sampling, though the number of cases is small, it is not always easy to stick to the selected cases, right? So the unit of sample may be widely dispersed. So some of the cases of the sample may not cooperate with the researcher, and some others may be inaccessible. So you are selected some people as a sample, but they are not cooperating or they are not accessible. Right? So because of these problems, all the cases may not be taken up, right? You cannot study everything. The selected cases may have to be replaced by the other cases. So you need to replace them with the other. So this is called as changeability. So this changeability of unit stands in the way of results of the study. So that may be the disadvantage. Then impossibility of sampling. So deriving a representative sample is difficult when the universe is too small or too heterogeneous. Whatever group you are selecting, that is called as universe. So in this case, the census study is the only alternative in a sense. Moreover, in the studies requiring a very high standard of accuracy, the sampling method may be unsuitable. There will be chances of errors, even if the samples are drawn most carefully. So what type of research you are going to do, accordingly, the sampling will be going to change. So whenever you are doing sampling, you have to always take care of a sample size. A sample could be of optimum size, which fulfills the requirement of the efficiency. So if you are going in a particular population, suppose 1,000 people are there, right? That is the whole population. Then if you are going to take the sample, then it should be at least 1/4. So accordingly, you have to select the sample. The sample must be representative. It should represent the whole population. It should be reliable, and it should have the flexibility. Some flexibility should be there. So it should not be always 200. You can take 250. You can take 230. So few more additional people or group you can add. It should be small enough to avoid unnecessary expenditure. Large sample size will be more complex, and it will make more expenditure, right? So you have to select the small but the enough sample size. That is very important. And it should be large enough to avoid sample errors. Now we have seen what are errors, and we have also seen that errors will get reduced when you increase the sample size. But at the same time, when you are increasing the sample size, you have to take care that it should not be increase the unnecessary expenditure. Now, Borg and Gall, these are the scientists who actually studied more on this sample size and suggested a general rule for selecting the sample size. And what is that? There are many variables. So whenever you are choosing a sample size, the samples in that particular sample size, you should add many variables. Only small differences or small relationships are expected or predicted. So whatever sample size you are choosing, the groups you are making, there should not be a very vast or large difference. There should be small differences or small relationships. The sample will be broken into subgroups. So you have to take that much sample size that you can make subgroups from that particular sample size. Sample size is heterogeneous in terms of variables under study. So whatever sample size you are using, it should be heterogeneous, right? So that why? Because you are going to take many variables, right? So whenever you are going to stress on different variables, the sample will be automatically heterogeneous, because every sample will because as the variables will increase, the heterogeneousness will get increased. As variables will be decreased, homogeneous sample will be there, because they are having similar characteristics. Then whenever you are thinking about the sample size, it should be a reliable measure of the dependent variables. Uh, so whatever sample you're choosing, it should be, it must give you the reliable measure for the dependent variables, right? Then some findings which they found about the sample size, that is, the large the sample size, the smaller of the magnitude of this sampling error, which we have already seen. Then survey studies typically should be larger samples. So whenever you are going to do any survey study, you have to choose the larger samples, because then whatever you actually need for the experiment. So you need for the experiment just 200 sample is enough, but then you make it 400 or 500 samples, because the returns from the survey are from who, in sense, are volunteers. So whatever survey you are going to do, it's the volunteers who are going to give you the feedback. So in that case, it is always better that if you have more number of samples or number of people, then researchers should select large number of samples, so that the subgroups of the adequate site we can do, that we have already seen. Then select availability and cost factor are the legitimate considerations in determining appropriate sample size. So subject availability, on what subject you're going to work, accordingly what samples are available. If I want to work on diabetes people, so I need to select all the diabetes people. So are they available? How many diabetic people are available? How many are present in a particular district? How many I'm going to use? Then if I want to use the more number of people, then what will be the cost? Because I need to do few experiments, or I need to take their interviews again and again, I need to go and meet them, so it affects on the cost factor. So all these things I need to take into the consideration. Now, which are the factors which affect on the sample size? The first one is nature of the population. So as I said, if I want to particularly work on a diabetes, I may get more number of people. If I want to work on the blood grouping, I can take maximum one. If I want to work on blood pressure, then also I may get more. But if I want to work on some genetic disorder, which is muscular dystrophy, where the muscles are just weakened and the person cannot even stand, then there is very less chance that I will get such samples, right? So the nature of population is very important. Then style of research, what kind of research I'm going to do, that will affect definitely on the sample size. So that is important. Then method of data used, what type of data I'm going to get collect. whether I need to apply the statistics. If I need to apply the statistic, then it is very important that how many what should be the sample size. That actually you cannot apply a statistic if your sample size is too small. So it requires a specific sample size. So I need to take that into the consideration. Then number of variables, how many variables I'm going to take, how many variables I'm going to study, how many variables I can study, is it feasible for me to study 4 or 5 variables? Then number of strata required, I'm going to make subgroups. How many subgroups I'm going to prepare? Then it all this is going to affect on the size of the sample, because if I want to make 5 stratas, then accordingly my sample size should be more. Then what kind of sample I'm going to use, right? So I'm going to use questionnaire, people, animal, plants, what kind of sample I'm going to use, and then what kind of data analysis is required. It is actually what method and analysis is near about the same. So how I'm going to analyze the data, which method I'm going to use, whether I'm going to use statistics or it is, I'm not going to use statistic, it is just a qualitative data, that should be all defined whenever you are doing sampling. So when you are doing sampling, all these factors you have to consider, and then you have to do the sampling. If you are considering all these factors, then only your sampling will be correctly done. Now, sorry. So these are the characteristics of good samples. So if I want to do the sampling, good sampling, what features or what characteristics that good sampling must have? The sample should be chosen randomly. My sample should be random. It should not be very selective. I know these people, so I'm selecting them. No, it should not be like that. I want to know really the solution for this particular problem, so I must choose the sample randomly. Then representative of the population, whatever sample I'm taking, it must be a representative of the population. If I'm choosing very small number of sample, or I'm taking a very large number of sample, then if I'm taking large, it will be more complex and I may do lot many mistakes. Instead, whatever population of sample I'm taking, or whatever sample I'm taking of that particular population, it should represent that particular population. So that much amount of the sample must be there. Then according to the research objective, my research objective is there that I want to study the diabetic people, and when I'm taking the sample, I'm selecting few diabetic people, and but there are two diabetic types, that is type 1 and type 2. I must select, I just want to work on diabetic people type 1 or type 1 diabetes, and I'm choosing, while taking sample, I'm not seeing that whether they are type 1 or type 2. They are having diabetes of type 1 and type 2. I'm just selecting them randomly. Then it is not according to my objective. My objective is, I want to study whatever diabetes is there, and the type of that diabetes is type 1, and I'm choosing type 2 also. So it must go according to your research objective. It should be flexible. So whatever sampling I'm doing, there should be some flexibility. So if I want to do some changes, I could able to do. Then large enough to give sufficient precision. So if I want to draw some conclusions from my research, the sample size should be that much large enough, so that I could give whatever solution I'm giving or whatever conclusion I'm drawing from my research, it should represent the whole population. It should not be very less that I could not statistically prove that it is correct. Then the sampling should be unbiased. Now, what is the meaning of unbiased? Suppose I want to do the study on the teaching method, right? and I want to select some few colleges, few school. But now here I'm doing biasness. I'm just selecting the people from my own college, from my own whatever I know. These are my friends, and I need suppose 200 students for my study. So I'm selecting all 200 maximum, or not all, but 150 just from my college only. So it will not give me the correct solution or the correct representation of the sample. So that is the biasness, because I know the people, I know they will cooperate with me, so I will go with them. It should not be. One example, you can see here the biasness of the sampling in the cartoon, that there are only 4 people, right? And what they have taken, this person has taken the responses that I love responding survey. So how many of you love to respond the survey, right? There are only 4 people, and he has taken the responses for this particular question, that how many of them need to or love to respond the survey. What he got? These 99.8. It means out of these 3, out of these 4, 3 people said they love to give the respond to the survey, and one may said no. And what I'm concluding on the basis of this, that yes, that we received 500 responses and found that people love responding to the surveys. So those 500 people, or just imagine that those 500 people are my friends only, and I told them that you have to respond. Out of them only 2 3 didn't respond, or 4 didn't respond, and then I'm getting this result, and I'm concluding that yes, that out of 500 these many people love to respond. But the reality may not be like that, because if you give the same thing to the other, just imagine that if you go to some shop and they tell you to write the feedback about their shop or whatever, then how many of us are really interested in doing that, right? Some of them. But if you take the overall population, then you may come to the conclusion that it's very less. And here they are getting exactly reverse result. So that might be the condition whenever the sampling is biased. Now, which steps are involved in the sampling procedure? So according to W.C. Kocham, which are the steps? Now, why this particular scientist? Because he is the one who worked very hard on sampling, and he is the one who gave the correct procedures and all details about the sampling methods. So the first is formulation of the objective of the study. So whenever you're doing sampling, it should go with your objective, right? And whatever formulation you did for the objective, that should be whatever formulation you did for the objective, it should be according to that sampling should be there. So sampling and objective must go hand in hand, right? Then clear definition of the population to be selected. So whatever population you are selecting for the sampling, you must give clear idea about that population whenever you are presenting the data, right? And you yourself must have a clear idea about the population. So if I want to study diabetes, type 1 diabetes, then I am going to select only people who are having type 1 diabetes only. So this clear definition and that particular population I'm going to select. Then use of appropriate tools. Now what or which tools I will use, right? So to do the sampling, tools in the sense, now I want to study about the, as I said, that I want to find out that how many students like the teaching method, right? And I have selected 200 people. So how I'm going to take the feedback? So am I going to give the questionnaire? Am I going to take their interview? And then I'm going to decide, so which tool I'm going to use. So tool must be appropriate, right? So these are very important steps when you're doing the sampling, right? Then no overlapping in a choice of sampling unit. So I'm not going to repeatedly take the interview of the same person, right? I'm going to involve different people, different students, so that I can get maximum feedback and their opinions about the teaching, right? Then the selection of adequate size of sample. As I said, if it should be at least 1/4, right? It should be more than 1/4, it should be 2/4, but that particular adequate size of the sample I must select, right? And at the end, then tabulation and analysis of the sample. Before doing sampling, I must know that how I'm going to tabulate it. So how many people I'm going to choose? I'm going to choose 200 people, right? I must know name, number of those people, what they said about the teaching methods, everything. And all this I'm going to analyze. So how I'm going to analyze? Am I going to compare it with the students who are not at all enrolled for the colleges? They are doing some job, and then I'm going to compare, or they I'm going to compare the teaching method which is there in the school and then colleges. So whatever research I'm going to do, accordingly I'm going to analyze the sample. So accordingly I have to decide the methods for the analysis of sample, and this should be well defined before you do the sampling. Now, as you all know, there are two types of sampling strategies. One is probability or random sampling strategies, and another one is non-probability or non-random sampling strategies. We need to stop it here. As you all know, that the 10 minutes notice has displayed already by Zoom. So we need to stop it here. See you in the next lecture. Bye-bye.